Hey, what's up? My name is Norris, and today we're going to be doing a sew-along with Mimi G Style Simplicity Pattern 8845. Now, Mimi and I are so excited to be sharing our very first unisex pattern, so let's get started. Now, if you're new to sewing or just need a refresher course, be sure to click the link in the description box below. Once you do that, come back and follow along with us. Okay, once again, like I said, we're using Mimi G Style Simplicity Pattern 8845. So if you look on the back, you'll see all your fabric suggestions, any notions, you'll see all the body measurements and finished garment sizes. Okay, now we're going to go through all the pattern pieces that we're going to be using today. You're going to be using pattern piece number 5, which is the upper pocket. You're going to be using pattern piece number 14, which is the back loop. Pattern piece number 7, which is the yoke front. Pattern piece number 8, which is the welt and facing. Pattern piece number 9, which is the lower pocket. Pattern piece number 3, which is the side front. Pattern piece number 17, which is the cuff. Pattern piece number 18, which is the lower band. Pattern piece number 4, which is the pocket facing. Pattern piece number 2, which is the middle front. Pattern piece number 6 is a flap. Pattern piece number 10, which is the back, and this one right here is cut on the fold. Pattern piece number 13 is the collar. Pattern piece 11, side back. Pattern piece number 16, which is the undersleeve. Pattern piece number 12, which is the yoke back. Pattern piece number 15, which is the upper sleeve. You're also going to need pattern piece number 19, which are your tabs. And then this last piece here is number 20. It's the buttonhole guide. So we're not going to be cutting fabric out of this. You're just going to be using it as a guide to put your buttons and your buttonholes. Now that I have everything cut out of my fabric, we can begin sewing. So before we get started, I want to let you know that I'm using a corduroy, and it's a light corduroy. So it's not as heavy as your traditional denim. So I do have a few of my pieces interfaced, like my collar, my band, my welts, and my flaps. Depending on how heavy your denim is, you might not have to interface all these pieces. But pieces that I would recommend that you interface is your welt and also your side front, just behind your welt pocket stitching lines, which is right here. So get a piece of fusible interfacing that's 2 inches by 6 inches and just put it right behind your welt pocket and just fuse it onto the back of that stitching line. Now, once you have everything interfaced that you need to, we can begin sewing. Okay, first what you want to do is just grab your front, your middle front, and also your side front, and we're going to pin them together. So just take your front and middle front, make sure your notches are aligning, and we're going to pin. And also while we're here, we're going to pin the side front to the middle as well. So make sure you align those 2 notches right there, indicating that it's the side, and pin. Now that I have all 3 pieces pinned together, we're going to head over to the machine. We're going to stitch this side down using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we're just going to flip it and then do the same thing to the other side. Okay, once you stitch them together, it should look just like this. On the back, if you look at my seams, I haven't done anything to them yet. In the instructions, it's going to tell you to do a flat felt seam. I'm not going to do them because of the purpose of the video. But if you do want to do the flat felt seam, what would you do is you would trim the outside seam and then take the inside seam and just fold over 1/4 inch, fold it down onto the fabric, and then you would press it. And then you would just top stitch on the other side. But for this project, I'm just going to serge mine closed, and then I'm going to just press them out and then top stitch. First, I'm gonna top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, and then 1/4 inch away from that stitch. Once you do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, so now when I top stitch, I'm going to increase my length a little bit. I usually stitch my regular stitching at a 2.5, but for top stitching, I'm gonna go up to a 3.5. And I'm just gonna start right here, 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Back to the beginning and end. Once again, my seam is pressed outward. Okay, so after I stitch that down, I'm going to go 1/4 inch away from that stitch and do the exact same thing. Okay, now we're gonna do this side the same way we just did this side. Okay, once we have our 2 rows of top stitching, and as you can see it catches the seam on the other side, we're going to move along and work on our front facing. So take your pocket facing, and on both of the sides here, we're going to turn in 1/4 inch, and we're gonna stitch it down. Go to your machine, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, as you can see, I went ahead and stitched down my sides. I only turned under 1/4 inch. And I also went ahead and serged the bottom of the facings because I didn't want to keep it raw. So now I'm going to take it, and with right sides facing, I'm going to match up my notches to that middle piece and pin. Okay, now I'm gonna go to my machine and I'm gonna start on one side. So with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to stitch all the way down. You should have a marking right there. I'm gonna pivot and I'm gonna continue with my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to my other marking, pivot again, and then up the other side. So basically I'm just going to stitch down 5/8 of an inch, pivot, go to my marking, and then up the other side. Okay, so now that I've stitched this down, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clip into the corners here, but I'm not gonna clip through the stitching. Be sure to get close, but don't clip through it, just so you can get a clean seam. Like that. And the other side. Okay, it's gonna look just like this. I'm also trim some of this seam here so it won't be so bulky on my chest. And next I'm gonna turn it to the wrong side. So it should look like this on the front, and the facing should be on the back. Now go to the ironing board and give it a good press. And after you press it, you're gonna do a basting stitch right across the top here, 1/4 inch away from the edge. All right, now that I have my facing attached to my front pieces, I'm gonna put it to the side for just a moment, and we're gonna work on our upper pocket. So what you wanna do is you wanna head to your ironing board and you want to fold right sides facing. You want to fold in 5/8 of an inch and press all the way around. So the sides, the bottom, and then the other side here. Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, as you can see, I have my pocket folded to the front, 5/8 of an inch all the way around. Now I want to take my front pieces and turn it wrong side up. And take your pocket wrong side up as well, and we're going to place it right where your markings should be. Now it's going to be kind of tight up here to the top, so you want to make sure you catch your front side pieces right here with the top of the pocket. It'll make it a lot easier for you, especially when you start sewing. So pin at the sides first, because you're going to have to catch it. Okay, so what we're gonna do first, we're going to stitch this down from the wrong side, and your bobbin is gonna be on the front. This is to get a very accurate stitch line because you're gonna see the stitching on your garment, on the front of your garment. So I would highly recommend that you do it just like this rather than trying to top stitch it from this side and not catching the pocket. So what we're going to do is we're going to start on one side and we're going to stitch close to the edge all the way around to the other side. And then we're going to move over 1/8 of an inch and stitch all the way around again. Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, now that we stitched our pocket to our front pieces, you can see the stitching here. A little bit here on the back. So just take this and move it to the side for just a moment, and we're going to work on our pocket flaps. So one of these are interface just because my fabric is a little lighter. If you're using a heavy denim, like I said, yours don't need to be interface. Just saying. So just take them right sides facing. You want to pin, and then stitch 5/8 of an inch all the way around to the other side, leaving this side open. Okay, then I have the stitch. I'm just going to clip my corners like that. Trim a little bit off the front. And also the side. Now turn it right side out. And grab a point turner. And point those corners out. Once you do that, you want to give it a good press. And after that, we're going to edge stitch all the way around, and then we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch away from that stitch. Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, my flap is top stitched, edge first, and then a 1/4 inch away from that one. And I also went ahead and did my buttonhole. You probably won't have a chance to do it after this. You will, but it'll be very difficult. So next, you want to take this notch and match it up with the raw edge on your front pieces and match up your small dots. We're going to go to the machine and just base this down. Okay, once we have the welt pocket based on, we're going to move along to the infamous welt pocket. So I'm going to be doing every step because this might be difficult for some people. So before we get started, be sure to take a piece of fusible interfacing that's 2 inches by 6 inches and just fuse that on the back of the stitching line for the welt pocket on that side front piece. So first, I'm going to turn my front pieces wrong side up. You can see the little box here. And you want to take your lining piece. My lining and my pocket bag is cut out of the same fabric. So just the first piece is going to be called the lining piece. So you want to take your lining piece and you want to place it onto your front pieces, right side to wrong side of your front pieces. So just like this, and you'll know what side to lay it on because you'll see a small notch that lines up with the notch on your front piece. So once you do that, I like to take pins just to make sure they line up. So I just take a pin and just pin it through to see if it's hitting my marks on my side front piece. And once you do that, you're going to pin this down. We're going to do a basting stitch between this dot and then this dot and that dot. You should have marked all of your pattern pieces. If you don't, you need to go ahead and do it now. And also, a nice tip that I like to do, instead of just getting up on the machine and just stitching that down, I kind of mark it too, just so I can keep a straight line. So I'm going to head to the machine. I'm going to do 2 rows of basting stitches right at your lines. Okay, like I said, I'm doing 2 rows of basting stitches. So I'm gonna first put my needle right where the beginning of the first dot, and I'm gonna baste stitch. Then I'm gonna stop at that dot, cut my threads, and do the other one the same exact way. Okay, now that I have my 2 stitching lines done with a basting stitch, you want to go ahead and grab your welt pocket, and there are 2 dots that you should meet up. So just fold where your folding line is and make sure your dots are lined up. And a good way to find out if they line up is just take a pin and put it through one and see if it goes through the other side. Now once you do that, you want to press it, turn your front pieces right side up, and the side of the welt that is short, you want to have that facing down onto your front piece. And then what you do next is match up your dots on this first line here. You have one to the left and one to the right. You want to do the one to the left because your welt pocket is going to fold up like that, okay? So match up your dots and pin it. And once again, I'm just going to take my chalk roller and just give myself a little line for a guide. Just like that. So now head over to the machine and you want to stitch this down in between the dots. So what I'm going to do first is put my needle inside the dot just to make sure it's in the right place. Change your stitching back to a regular stitch, and we're going to stitch this down in between dots. Back stitch at the beginning and also at the end. Okay, once you stitch it down, it should look just like this. As you can see, it's secured. Front piece is secured too, that way. So next you want to take your pocket bag, and we're going to turn it right sides facing, so it's going to look like this. The wrong side is going to be up. And we're going to stitch down the stitching lines without the dots. So if you grab your pattern piece, you'll see the markings. You have 2 dots on the right side of the stitching box, but you don't have any on the left side. So you want to line the ones that are on the left onto the other stitching line that we made. But before we pin this down, you want to make sure your welt is out the way. So you just want to bend it back and pin it. This is just temporarily so it can get out the way. So now you have that stitching line here, and you want to match up the 2 points with the point of the stitching line without the dots, okay? Try to match it up by sticking your pins through to see if your pins match up on the other side. Just to let you know, we're going through all thicknesses, even the lining underneath. We're going to be stitching through all of that, just not through the welt piece. So once again, I'm going to take my chalk roller and line up my points and just give myself a good guide. Now head over to the machine and we're going to stitch this down in between the dots. Do not go across, just straight down. Okay, first I'm going to put my needle right where that point is at the top, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and also at the end. All right, it should look just like this. Okay, so now that we have this stitch down here, I'm going to fold that back and just give it a temporary pin just to get it out the way. And now what we're going to do, we're going to flip it around where the wrong side of the front piece is faced up. And we're going to slash it right in the middle. And we're going to slash into the corners. So just double check to make sure you don't have your welt or your pocket bag in the way, so we have a clean cut. First, I just like to just give it a little split right there in the middle, and then I just go up. And when you get about 5/8 of an inch away, you want to just slash into your corners, but make sure you don't go beyond that or through your stitching. All right, so look, it should look just like this on both sides. Okay, now unpin the welt and also the pocket right here on this side, and just take the pocket and stuff it on the inside. And you're going to do the same thing for your welt. Just take your welt, tuck it in all the way in. And also those corners that we clipped. Okay, it's going to end up like this. So just give it a good press. And once you press it, we're going to flip it over like this. Once you flip it over, we're going to go to both corners. You're going to catch the welt, the corner that we cut out, and we're going to stitch it across right here, just where the triangle is, through the triangle, through the welt, and also through your pocket bag. Okay, so like I said, I'm just going to do one corner at a time. You're going to flip up until you see that little triangle cut that we cut out when we cut into the corners, and you see your welt. So we're just going to stitch across this piece right here through the pocket bag. So you want to take your lining piece and your front piece and just push it up out the way. Back stitch at the beginning and also at the end. So it has that end right there secured on the other side. So we just do the other side. When you do this, be sure to pull that triangle tight. Okay, so both sides look like this. Okay, as you can see, I have my welt pocket turned under 1/4 inch on this side, and I edge stitched it onto my lining piece. So next, I'm going to just take my lining piece and move it right up under my front pieces, but I'm going to leave my pocket bag out. So what we're going to do next is head to the machine, and I'm going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the seam right here on the left side, all the way down to the bottom of the welt. So once you have that top stitching here, 1/8 of an inch away from the welt seam right there, you want to just take this and turn it wrong side up. And now you see it coming together. So you want to take the side here and then the top and turn it under 5/8 of an inch. So you want to turn both sides on the inside like this. And you want to pin. All right, just so you know, it might be easier to press this before you pin it, but I just find it easier to just turn under and press it. So once you have it pinned, stitch all the way up here, pivot, and then across the top. And please be careful not to stitch your front. So make sure you have it like this up on the machine when you stitch up and then across. Okay, I went ahead and turned under 5/8 of an inch across the top and on the side, and then I stitched it down. I also went ahead and basted the front of this close, and I basted the bottom to my front piece. After you do that, you want to turn around to the front, and we're going to stitch 1/8 of an inch on the right side of the welt right here. And after we do that, we're going to do a zigzag stitch just to secure the corners. Okay, starting 1/4 inch away at the top of the welt, I'm just going to backstitch at the beginning and end. Okay, now I'm going to change my stitch to a zigzag stitch. I have like a 2.5 width and a 1 millimeter length. And we're just going to zigzag the sides. Just go back and forth a few times to make sure it's secure. And once you do this side, you want to do the other side the same exact way. Okay, now that our welt pocket is complete, we can move along to complete our front. So take your yoke front, and you should do a stay stitch going in this direction along the neckline. So with right sides facing, you want to match up your notch right there and pin. Okay, now that we have it pinned, we're going to go to the machine and we're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance across the top. Okay, so I went ahead and pressed my seams up, and I did my top stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the seam and then 1/4 inch away from there. Next, we're going to work on our center front. So just take it, turn it wrong side up. And if you notice, I put some interfacing right here because we're going to be adding buttons, and this is not a heavy fabric, so I wanted to give myself a little bit more support because we're going to be folding this anyway, and you won't see it underneath. So the next thing to do is to take 5/8 of an inch and fold in on the center front and press it. Once you press it, you want to take your scissors and trim it down to 3/8 of an inch. Okay, now that I trimmed it down, we're going to turn it right side up. Okay, once we trim down that front edge to 1/4 inch from the 5/8 of an inch that we turn under, we're going to turn your center front right sides facing at your fold line here, and we're going to create our front facing, just like that. And you should have a little dot right there from your markings, and I'm going to pin. So we're going to go to the machine, and we're going to start at the neckline and stitch down to the dot, pivot, and then stitch through the front. And we're going to start from the top. We're going to stitch down to our dot, so back stitch at the beginning. All right, get to the dot. We're going to pivot. And now we're going to sew through the center front. Back stitch at the end. Okay, your stitching should look just like this. So I'm just going to turn it to the side for just a moment, and I'm going to clip right in the center. Please do not clip through your stitching. Just get as close as you can. And then you want to trim your seam, and it's going to look just like that. Now what you want to do is just turn the facing around. If you have a point turner, or anything pointy at the end, you could turn it and point the corners out. And basically, we're just going to fold this back up underneath. And then now you end up with the front just like that. Now take this to the machine, give it a good press, and press it all the way down along that fold line. And also make sure that your pocket bag is up under the facing, and turn it over and continue pressing. And we're going to just baste along the edge all the way up. All right, so after you baste this close on the edge, you want to turn it to the right side, and we're going to top stitch right over that basting stitch. And then we're going to move a 1/4 inch to the edge and do one more row of top stitching. Once you do that, do the exact same steps to create your other side. Now we're going to move along and start constructing our back pieces. Okay, now you want to grab your back piece and your side back pieces, and with right sides facing, you want to line up your notches and pin. You want to do that for both sides. Okay, now head over to the machine, and we're just going to do a straight stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance for both sides. All right, I attached my side back pieces onto my back piece, and I pressed my seams towards the middle back piece. And once again, you can serge them and then top stitch, or you can do the flat fell seam method. And I just went ahead and stitched 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, and then a 1/4 inch away from there towards the inside. Next, we're going to attach our back yoke. I went ahead and did some stay stitching around my neckline just so it won't grow while I'm sewing. And with right sides facing, you want to attach your yoke to your back pieces, matching up the notches in the middle, then pin. Now head to the machine and do a straight stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now that I have my back yoke attached, I went ahead and pressed my seams up, and I stitched 1/8 of an inch close to the seam, and then a 1/4 inch away from there. And now we're going to attach our front pieces to our back pieces at the shoulders. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and show you how to do your loop. So you want to take your loop and press it in half like this. And once you do that, you want to open it up and then take each end and put them there in the center where that crease is. And once you do that, you want to turn all of that into the inside. And you're going to stitch close to the edge to close it out, and then also on the other end. So just put it to the side for just a moment. So you want to place your front pieces on top of your back piece just like that, right sides facing. You want to find that notch, pin. Okay, now head over to the machine, and you want to do a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance across your shoulder there, and then the other side. Okay, as you can see, we have our front and back attached at the shoulders, and we went ahead and pressed our seam allowances towards the back yoke, and then top stitched like we have been doing with all of our seams, whether you did it with flat felled or if you serged them. Okay, after you have your loop attached, you want to go ahead and start on your collar. So on one of my collars, I went ahead and pressed up on the notch side 5/8 of an inch, and then I trimmed it down to 3/8 of an inch, just like this. So you want to take your other collar, and with right sides facing, you want to lay them over each other, and you want to pin across the top and on the side. So we're going to head to the machine and make sure that the 3/8 that we turned up is still up here. And we're going to stitch up the side across the top and then down the other side using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now we're going to clip our corners, making sure that we don't clip into our stitch. And then just trim a little bit around the sides. And a little bit across the top. Now let's turn it right side out. Poke them corners out. Now go give your collar a good press. Okay, now we're going to attach the collar to the jacket. So find your notches in the center. And you want to pin. And then continue pinning, making sure you line up the ends on the side. And you can clip into your jacket where you need a little more ease. Okay, now head over to the machine and we're going to stitch all the way across using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now that we have the collar attached to the jacket, we're just going to do a few clips in here. Just like that. And we're going to trim just a little bit. Then you want to take this seam and press it up. And once you press it, give it a good press. You want to take that collar and put it just over the seam like this. And we're going to pin from the other side. Pin right through the seam, catching the collar on this side. So once again, you pin in the back through the seam, catching the collar on this side. Okay, now that we have it pinned, we're going to go to the machine and we're going to turn it around and stitch right in the ditch, catching the collar on this side. Okay, like I said, we're going to start right there in the ditch, right in the middle of the seam. We're going to back to the beginning and end. Okay, now that our collar is attached, we're going to work on our sleeves. Okay, with our sleeve, we're going to take our undersleeve and lay it on top of our upper sleeve, right sides facing. There should be a double notch on that side here where that curve is. And I want you to pin. Down here at the bottom, there should be a dot indicating for you to stop sewing. You should pin there. Okay, so we're going to head to the machine and we're going to stitch starting at the top of our sleeve all the way down until we get to that mark where we should stop using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now that we have our undersleeve and upper sleeve attached, you want to take your scissors and just make a split right here. Be sure not to clip into your stitching. So it's going to be just right there where the extension is. So now we're going to do a roll hem. You're just going to take your sleeve on one side, roll it once, and then a second time for it to meet the seam. You can pin it. We're going to stitch close to the fold edge, and then we're going to stitch to the edge as well. And you want to do the same thing to the upper sleeve. So you want to take it and do a roll hem once. And then one more time. And then pin that too. So we're going to stitch to the edge and also on the folded edge. Be sure not to get them caught up when you're stitching. Okay, so stitching on the top side, I'm going to stitch close to this side here, just so I can catch the folded edge underneath. Back stitch at the beginning and end. And now I'm going to do one more row on the edge here. Just like that. And we're going to do the other side the same exact way. Okay, so once you top stitch the hem on both sides of your sleeve, right here at this seam, you want to go ahead and press your seams towards your upper sleeve, and then follow that stitch all the way up to top stitch it in that seam right there. So you'll have 2 stitches. Okay, now we're going to attach our sleeve to the jacket, but before we do that, I went ahead and did 2 rows of basting stitches from one notch to the other, and I just eased it just a little bit just so the sleeve cap could fit onto the jacket. Depending on what kind of denim or whatever fabric you're using, if it has a little stretch, just a little, you might not have to do this, but mine has no stretch at all, so I just have to ease it in just a little bit. So now that I did that, I'm going to take my jacket, and right sides facing, I'm going to attach the sleeve to the jacket, starting at my notches. And you should match up your notches. There are 2 notches indicating that it's the back, and 1 notch indicating that it's the front. Now, once you have it all pinned, if you have to make the ease stitching, do the other sleeve the same way and pin it just like this. And we're going to go to the machine and we're going to stitch on one side all the way through at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now I have my sleeves attached, and I went ahead and pressed my seams up. And you could either do the flat fell seams or serge them like I am right now. And I did 2 rows of top stitching. The first one is 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, and the second one is 1/4 inch away from that one. So you want to do both sleeves the same exact way. Next, we're going to turn the jacket so it can be right sides facing, so we can close up the sleeve and also the side seam. So just like this, right sides facing, we're going to pin at our underarm seam first, and then at the notches. Okay, so we're going to head to the machine, and we're going to start on one end and stitch all the way down the underarm and down the side seam. We're going to use a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You want to pin and sew your other side seam the same exact way. Okay, now that I have both sides stitched down, we're going to top stitch. So you want to take your seams and press them forward. So once you press them forward, we're going to take your sleeve and turn it inside out. Basically, we're going to top stitch at our underarm seam by creating a tunnel like this at your sewing machine and sewing it all the way through until you get to your side seam. Okay, like I said, you're going to turn it wrong side out and create a little tunnel, and you want to slide through the machine like this, and we're only going to do a couple of inches at a time because it's so tight. Okay, so switch to your top stitching length, and we're going to start 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. So back stitch at the beginning and also the end. Like I said, we only have room to do a few inches at a time. So just take your time. Crawl it back every time you sew some. And then now you're gonna work your way all the way through until you get to your underarm. Now you want to do a second row of top stitching the same exact way, and you want to do both top stitching to your other underarm seam the same exact way. Okay, now that I top stitch on my side and under my underarm, we can go ahead and work on our cuffs. So I'm gonna just move this to the side for just a moment. So you want to take your cuff and fold it in half, right sides facing. And once you do that, you can take the side that doesn't have the notch and fold it back at the end, 5/8 of an inch, and give it a good press. And once you give it a good press, we're gonna trim this same end down to 3/8 of an inch. So I'm gonna just take my scissors and trim this side down to 3/8 of an inch. All right. So now when I fold it back, it's a little shorter. And now you're gonna head to the machine and you're gonna stitch both ends down right here and right here using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you're gonna do the other cuff the same exact way. Okay, now that I have both sides stitched, we're going to trim off the sides a little bit. And we're gonna turn it to the right side out. Now go give it a good press. Okay, after you give it a good press, it should look like this. So now we're gonna attach it to our sleeve. But first, you need to look at your sleeve, and you'll notice that the hem on your upper sleeve is overlapping your undersleeve. So you need to make sure that the cuff where the buttonhole is supposed to be is on that end. So only thing you have to do is flip it up, right sides facing, and start pinning. And there should also be a notch here too, indicating how you place it. Okay, so once you have it pinned, you want to just go to your machine and stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, starting on one side all the way to the other side. And you want to pin and sew your other cuff the same exact way. Okay, so after you sew it down, we're going to trim it just a little bit. Okay, now you want to turn your cuff to the inside and take that seam and tuck it just like that. To make it easier, you can just press it up. And once you have it pressed and tucked in, you want to take the cuff and overlap the seam. And then on the right side, you want to pin right there in the seam, catching the cuff on the other side, just like we did the collar, and you want to pin. Okay, so once you get to your machine, we're going to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, but also catching the cuff on the other side. And then we're going to move a 1/4 inch away from there and stitch all the way down again. And once you do that, we're just going to edge stitch down the side, off around the front, and then down the other side. Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, now that I have my cuffs attached, we can move along to our band. But right before we move on, I want to just note that right here at this split of the sleeve, you can do a zigzag stitch right here. This is just for reinforcement right here. Okay, now you want to take your band and you want to find your notches. Your notches should be on the top. And once you find your notches on the top, take the band and fold it in half and give it a good press. Once we press it, you want to take the unnotched side and fold it back 5/8 of an inch. Press that and then trim it down to 3/8 of an inch, just like we did the cuff and also just how we did the collar. Once you do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, so once you have your band folded and you went ahead and pressed down the unnotched side and trim that down to 3/8 of an inch, we're going to go ahead and do the same exact thing that we did to the cuff. So we're going to stitch on both ends using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we're going to attach it to the jacket. Okay, once again, we're going to take the ends and trim them down. Same exact thing to both sides. Turn the right side out. Now go to your iron and give it a good press. Okay, so I just turned my jacket upside down just so you can see it better. But I went ahead and pressed my band and I pinned it to my jacket right sides facing. So now I'm just going to do a long straight stitch all the way through using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now that I stitched all the way across, I also went ahead and trimmed my seam allowance down. So now after I do that, I'm just going to press the seam up. And I'm going to start pinning the same way I pinned my cuff and also my collar. So you want to take the band that's on the inside and on the right side, pin through the seam just so you can catch that band. Okay, so I want you to continue pinning all the way down the same exact way. And once you get to your machine, you're going to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the seam and then 1/4 inch away from there. And after you do that, the same way we did our cuff, you're going to egg stitch on the side and then all the way down on the end. Do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, now that our band is on, we need to go ahead and work on our tabs so we can attach them to the band. Okay, so you have 2 tabs. You want to just place them right side facing. And you want to stitch starting on one side around the top and then down the other side, leaving this side right here at the bottom open. And we're using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. You want to do that for both your tabs. Okay, once you stitch your tab pieces together, you want to go ahead and clip your corners. Be sure not to clip your stitching. And I went ahead and trimmed some off the sides too, just a little bit. So you might need something to turn it right side out. So grab a pen or your point turner. Any one of those should work. So you want to turn your other tab right side out the same exact way. And once you do that, you want to give them both a good press and then egg stitch all the way around and then do your buttonhole. Okay, so once you top stitch all the way around your tab and do your buttonhole, we're going to place it on the band. So what you're going to do is place them right sides facing, and you should have marked the tab placements on your waistband. So if you haven't, you need to go get your waistband and find those markings. So you want to place it just like that. And with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to stitch and come back and we'll continue. Okay, once we have stitched this down 3/8 of an inch, we're going to trim it. Not cutting our thread, but just trying to get close. Just like that. And now we're going to turn it over and we're going to top stitch close to the seam here and then another one 1/4 inch away from there. You want to do the same thing to your other tab as well. Okay, once you have your tabs in place, the only other thing to do is to grab your buttonhole guide, and on the left side, you want to place it on your center front, and you want to mark all of your buttonholes. And then after you do your buttonholes, you can put them over your jacket like this to put the placements of your buttons. And don't forget to put the buttonholes on your cuffs and also the buttons on your cuffs. And then you have 2 button placements on the back of your band. Once you do all that, you're all done. All right, thanks for watching. Be sure to tag us both on Instagram at Norris Danta and at Mimi G Style.